December 3rd, 1985. Marcus Restrepo had arranged the meet in a Medellin warehouse. Griselda Blanco's three best men against Pablo Escobar, finally captured. Marcus watched through his scope as they zip-tied Pablo's hands behind his back. That's when Pablo smiled. 45 seconds later, the warehouse erupted. Automatic gunfire, screaming. Then silence. When the smoke cleared, Pablo stood alone among 7 bodies. He looked directly at Marcus's sniper position and nodded, like they were old friends. That night changed everything. The DEA buried the reports. Griselda declared war on ghosts. And Marcus learned that sometimes the most dangerous man in the room is the one who wants to get captured. For 38 years, Marcus kept that secret. Until yesterday, when someone sent him the surveillance footage. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Restrepo's hands trembled as he ejected the USB drive from his laptop. 38 years of careful forgetting, and someone had just delivered his worst nightmare in 4K resolution. The Miami afternoon sun streamed through the blinds of his cramped office above a Cuban restaurant, casting prison bar shadows across the surveillance footage frozen on his screen. Pablo's face filled the monitor, that same knowing smile from 1985, captured by a camera that wasn't supposed to exist. His secure phone buzzed. Unknown number. You watched it. The voice was electronically distorted, neither male nor female. Marcus's hand instinctively moved to the Glock in his desk drawer. Who is this? Someone who was there that night. Someone who knows what you did. I didn't do anything. A mechanical laugh. You arranged the meet. You positioned yourself with a clear shot. You let Pablo orchestrate his own kidnapping, while Griselda's men walked into a slaughter. Marcus closed his eyes, transported back to that warehouse, the metallic smell of blood. His partner Tony's voice crackling through the radio, confused and desperate, as the ambush unfolded below. The way Pablo had looked up at him afterward, not as an enemy, but as an accomplice. What do you want? Justice has a way of finding us all, Marcus. Check your email. The line went dead. His laptop chimed with a new message. No sender, no subject line. Just a link and a timestamp, 6 p.m. today. Marcus clicked it. A live stream loaded, grainy footage of a young woman with dark hair walking through downtown Miami, completely unaware she was being filmed. His blood turned to ice. Sophia, his daughter. She moved with purpose between the federal courthouse steps, her prosecutor's badge catching the light. The same determination he'd once admired had become a target on her back. They'd barely spoken since her mother's funeral 3 years ago, when Marcus's secrets had finally driven the last wedge between them. The camera followed her to her car, zoomed in on her license plate, then cut to black. A message appeared. She prosecutes drug dealers now. Poetic justice? Marcus was already reaching for his keys when his office door exploded inward. 3 men in tactical gear rushed in, automatic weapons trained on his chest. They moved with military precision, too clean for cartel sicarios, too aggressive for federal agents. Hands where we can see them, barked the leader, a scarred man with dead eyes. Marcus slowly raised his palms. If you're here for the footage, I don't have it anymore. We know. Scarface stepped closer, his M4 never wavering. Our employer wants to discuss terms. What terms? Your silence. Permanently. The man to his left shifted position, and Marcus saw his chance. 38 years of guilt had been eating him alive, but muscle memory never died. He dove behind his desk as the first burst of gunfire shattered his laptop screen. Rolling hard, he yanked open the drawer and came up firing. The Glock bucked in his grip. Center mass, double tap, just like they'd trained him at Quantico. The man to his left dropped. Scarface spun toward him, but Marcus was already moving, using his desk as cover. Another burst chewed up the wood veneer, sending splinters into his cheek. He felt the familiar burn of adrenaline, the cold focus that had kept him alive in Colombia. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Scarface called out. Marcus popped up and fired twice more. The third gunman yelped and stumbled backward into the hallway. Only Scarface remained, circling around the desk with predatory patience. 38 years, Marcus. You really thought it would stay buried? I hoped Hope's a luxury men like us can't afford. Marcus feinted left, then broke right toward the window. Scarface's next burst caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. Pain exploded through his arm, but he managed to keep his feet. The window overlooked the alley behind the restaurant. 3 floors down, but better than a bullet to the brain. Marcus holstered his gun and kicked out the safety glass. "Running won't save her," Scarface taunted. "We know where your daughter works, where she lives, where she gets her morning coffee." That stopped Marcus cold. He turned back, bleeding and breathless. What does Sofia have to do with Pablo Escobar? Everything. Scarface smiled, the same cold expression Marcus remembered from that warehouse 38 years ago, the look of a man holding all the cards. "She's been investigating the wrong cartel, the one that's been operating under everyone's nose since 1985, the one her father helped create." The world tilted. Marcus felt the weight of decades crashing down on him. That's impossible. Pablo died in '93. Pablo Escobar died. But his network? His methods? His legacy? Scarface shook his head. That just evolved, got smarter, more careful, more connected. Before Marcus could respond, sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had called the cops. Scarface lowered his weapon slightly. "You have 24 hours to disappear, Marcus. After that, we solve this problem our way." The gunman melted into the stairwell shadows as the sirens grew louder, leaving Marcus alone with blood seeping through his shirt and the weight of an impossible truth. He pressed his palm against the shoulder wound, feeling the warm pulse of life escaping between his fingers. The pain was nothing compared to the revelation clawing at his chest. Sofia was in danger because of choices he'd made before she was even born. Marcus stumbled down the fire escape, each step sending lightning through his shoulder. The Miami heat hit him like a furnace, mixing his blood with sweat as he navigated the maze of dumpsters and delivery trucks behind Cafe Havana. Mrs. Rodriguez would find the bullet holes in his office ceiling tomorrow, and he'd have to lie to her kind face the way he'd been lying to everyone for 38 years. His truck sat baking in the afternoon sun 3 blocks away. Marcus fumbled for his keys, his good hand shaking as much from shock as blood loss. The leather seat burned against his back, but he barely noticed. All he could see was Sofia's face on that live stream, focused, determined, completely unaware that her father's sins were circling her like sharks. The drive to his apartment took 20 minutes through Miami traffic that moved like molasses. Marcus used the time to think, to plan, to remember. The warehouse in Medellin had been cold that night, the kind of industrial chill that seeped through concrete walls and settled in your bones. He'd positioned himself in the rafters with a clear view of the meeting point, watching through his scope as Griselda's lieutenants filed in with cocky confidence. They'd believed they were capturing Pablo Escobar. Instead, they'd walked into their own executions. Marcus parked in his usual spot beneath the faded awning of the Coral Gardens apartments, a mid-century relic that had seen better decades. The building manager, Old Pete, was watering the struggling hibiscus near the entrance, his weathered hands gentle with the dying blooms. "You okay there, Marcus?" Pete's eyes narrowed at the blood on his shirt. "You look like hell." "Cut myself on some broken glass. Nothing a bandage won't fix." Pete nodded, but his expression remained skeptical. "You know, in my day, we knew how to take care of our problems without making such a mess." The words carried more weight than casual conversation, and Marcus wondered if Pete had noticed the subtle surveillance that had been haunting the neighborhood. Old habits died hard. Marcus still swept for watchers every morning, still varied his routes, still slept with one eye open. Paranoia had kept him alive this long. His apartment on the 3rd floor felt like a museum of careful mediocrity. Generic furniture, no personal photos, nothing that couldn't be abandoned in 30 minutes. The only exception sat on his kitchen counter, a birthday card Sofia had sent him 2 years ago before their relationship had completely fractured. "Happy birthday, Dad. Hope you find some peace." Her handwriting was elegant, precise, like everything else about her. Marcus opened the first aid kit he kept stocked for occasions like this. The bullet had passed through clean, missing bone and major arteries. Lucky. He'd been lucky too many times for it to be coincidence. Maybe someone had been watching over him all these years, keeping him alive for a reckoning that was only now beginning. As he worked antiseptic into the wound, memories flooded back unbidden. Sophia at 8, helping him build a treehouse behind their old house in Kendall. Her mother Elena, beautiful and trusting, making café con leche on Sunday mornings while salsa music drifted from the radio. They'd been happy then, before the nightmares started, before the guilt began eating him alive from the inside. The lies had started small: late nights at the office, consulting work that required travel, business calls that couldn't be interrupted. Elena had believed him because she loved him, and Sophia had defended him because daughters protect their fathers, right up until the day she'd found his real DEA file hidden in the garage, with classified stamps and redacted mission reports that painted a very different picture of Marcus Restrepo than the security consultant she'd known her entire life. "You've been lying to us our whole marriage," Elena had whispered, her voice breaking. "What else don't I know about you?" Everything, he'd wanted to say. The bodies, the deals, the night he'd helped Pablo Escobar orchestrate one of the most brutal betrayals in cartel history. But some truths were too poisonous to speak aloud. Now Sophia was 32, a federal prosecutor with Elena's fierce sense of justice and Marcus's stubborn streak. She'd built a career putting drug dealers behind bars, never knowing her father had once been complicit in creating the very network she was fighting. The irony would have been beautiful if it wasn't so deadly. Marcus secured the bandage and reached for his secure phone. Sophia needed to know she was in danger, even if warning her meant confirming every suspicion she'd ever had about him. Her number was still in his contacts, marked simply as... His finger hovered over the call button as shadows lengthened across his apartment floor. 23 hours and counting. Before Marcus could press call, the phone buzzed in his hand. Sophia's name flashed on the screen, an impossible coincidence that made his blood freeze. "Dad?" Her voice carried that familiar prosecutor's edge, clipped and professional even when speaking to family. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth for once." Marcus's throat constricted. "Sophia, listen to me. You're in danger. You need to..." "Stop." The word cut through his warning like a blade. "I'm sitting in my office right now, looking at a Federal Express envelope that was delivered an hour ago. No return address. Inside is a photograph of you and a man I've been investigating for 6 months." The phone nearly slipped from Marcus's grip. "What man?" "Carlos Mendoza. He runs logistics for what we believe is one of the largest cocaine distribution networks on the East Coast. The photo shows you shaking hands with him outside a warehouse in Medellin. The timestamp says December 15th, 1985. Marcus closed his eyes, but the image was already there, crystal clear after 38 years. Carlos had been barely 20 then, one of Pablo's most trusted sicarios. If he was still alive, still operating... "Dad, are you there? That's not what it looks like." "Really?" "Because it looks like my father, the man who raised me to believe in justice, was making deals with drug lords while I was learning to walk." Sophia's voice cracked slightly, the prosecutor's mask slipping. "There's something else. A note. It says, 'Ask him about the night Griselda's men died. Ask him who really pulled the strings.'" Marcus felt the walls of his carefully constructed life crumbling. For 15 years, he'd convinced himself the past was buried, that his small security firm and quiet apartment were enough penance for what he'd done, that somehow he could protect Sophia by staying away from her. "Where did you get this?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out. The delivery service has no record of who sent it. The photo is authentic. Our tech guys confirmed it hasn't been doctored. And Dad..." She paused, and he could hear papers shuffling. "Carlos Mendoza disappeared from federal custody 3 days ago, walked out of a minimum security facility during a medical transport. Vanished." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Someone was orchestrating this, pulling strings Marcus couldn't see. The surveillance footage, the attack on his office, and now this, his daughter being drawn into a web she didn't understand. "Sophia, you have to listen to me. Whatever you think you know about that night, I know you lied to us. I know you weren't the security consultant you pretended to be. And now I'm starting to think I know why Mom really left you." Each word hit like a physical blow. Elena had left because she'd discovered the truth about his DEA years, but she'd never known the whole truth. Neither of them had. Some secrets were too dangerous to share, even with the people you loved most. Your mother left because I couldn't tell her who I really was. And who were you, Dad? Who are you? Marcus stared at Sophia's birthday card on his counter, at her careful handwriting wishing him peace. Peace was something men like him didn't deserve. I was someone who made choices I can't undo, someone who thought he was serving justice and ended up serving something much darker. Silence stretched between them, filled with years of half-truths and careful omissions. When Sophia spoke again, her voice was softer, younger, the voice of the little girl who used to fall asleep in his arms during Saturday movie nights. The warehouse in that photo. Is that where Griselda Blanco's lieutenants were killed? Marcus's hand tightened on the phone. How do you know about that? Because I've been investigating it. For months. It's connected to my Carlos Mendoza case, financial records, shipping manifests, witness statements. Dad, that massacre in 1985 wasn't just cartel violence. It was the moment everything changed. When Pablo Escobar stopped being just another drug lord and became something else entirely. The room spun around Marcus. His daughter, his brilliant, dedicated daughter, had stumbled onto the same truth that had been hunting him for 38 years. She'd found the thread that connected past to present, that linked his sins to her investigation. Sophia, you have to drop this case. Tonight. Walk away and don't look back. I can't do that. 5 people are dead because of what Carlos Mendoza's organization. 5 people are dead because of what I did. The words erupted from him like a confession he'd been holding back for decades. That night in Medellin, I helped orchestrate the biggest betrayal in cartel history. I'm the reason Pablo became unstoppable. I'm the reason everything that came after became possible. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus could hear his daughter breathing, could imagine her processing this revelation in her methodical prosecutor's way. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. My God, Dad, what did you do? Marcus opened his mouth to answer, but the words died in his throat. How could he explain 38 years of guilt in a single phone call? How could he make her understand that some truths were too heavy for one person to carry? Sophia, not over the phone. It's not safe. Not safe for who? You or me? Her voice hardened again, the prosecutor returning. Because someone clearly thinks I need to know. They sent this photo for a reason. That's exactly why we can't. Marcus stopped, his blood turning cold. Through his apartment window, he could see a black sedan parked across the street. It hadn't been there 20 minutes ago. Sophia, where are you right now? My office. Why? Are you alone? Dad, you're scaring me. Good. You should be scared. Marcus moved away from the window, keeping low. Listen to me very carefully. Do not leave your office alone. Do not go to your apartment tonight. And whatever you do, don't try to contact Carlos Mendoza or anyone connected to him. Carlos is in federal custody. No, he's not. You said it yourself. He disappeared 3 days ago. And if he's anything like the man I knew 38 years ago, disappearing was just the first move in a much larger game. The line went quiet except for Sophia's breathing. Marcus could picture her at her desk, surrounded by case files and legal briefs, trying to reconcile the father she'd known with the stranger on the phone. I don't understand any of this. I know. And I'm sorry. Marcus pulled on his jacket, wincing as the fabric scraped against his bandaged shoulder. But right now, understanding isn't as important as staying alive. Staying alive? Dad, what exactly are you involved in? Before he could answer, Marcus heard voices in the hallway, low, urgent Spanish that made his skin crawl. The accent was wrong for Miami, too precise, too formal, Colombian. Sophia, I have to go. Promise me you won't leave the federal building tonight. Promise me. I can't just hide. Promise me. Okay, I promise. Marcus ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket, his mind racing through possibilities. The men in the hallway were either very good or deliberately careless. Their conversation carried just enough for him to understand they were discussing entry points and exit strategies. Professional kidnappers planning a snatch, not assassins looking for a quick kill. That meant they wanted him alive. For now. He moved to his bedroom closet and pulled away the false back panel he'd installed years ago. Inside was everything he'd hoped never to use again: fake identification, untraceable credit cards, and a go bag containing $40,000 in cash. At the bottom, wrapped in oiled cloth, was his backup weapon, a .357 revolver that had no serial numbers and no history. The voices in the hallway had stopped. Marcus counted to 30, then crept to his front door and peered through the peephole. Empty corridor, but something felt wrong. The silence was too complete, too manufactured. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Mr. Restrepo, we have a mutual friend who would like to speak with you. Please open your door." Marcus almost laughed. Polite kidnappers, Carlos always had preferred the velvet glove approach when it served his purposes. But beneath the courtesy was an unmistakable threat, cooperation, or consequences. Another text arrived immediately. "Your daughter is very beautiful. Harvard Law, correct? Such an accomplished young woman." The blood drained from Marcus's face. They had Sophia under surveillance. Probably had been watching her for weeks. Every move he made now would determine whether she lived or died. A third message. "The fire escape is also covered. Please don't make this more difficult than necessary." Marcus holstered the revolver and walked to his door. His reflection in the security mirror showed a man who'd aged a lifetime in a single day. Gray-faced, hollow-eyed, carrying the weight of choices that had finally come due. "What guarantees do I have?" he called out. "None." The voice belonged to someone young, confident. "But consider your alternatives." Marcus's hand hovered over the deadbolt. In the distance he could hear sirens, police or ambulance, impossible to tell. The ordinary sounds of a city going about its business while his world collapsed around him. He thought of Sophia at 8 years old, gap-toothed and fearless, climbing too high in that backyard tree. "Don't worry, Daddy," she'd called down. "I won't fall." But she had fallen eventually. They all had. And now the ground was rushing up to meet them with 38 years of accumulated velocity. Marcus turned the lock and opened the door. 3 men stood in the hallway, dressed like businessmen but carrying themselves like soldiers. The youngest one smiled, the same predatory expression Marcus remembered from Medellin. "Señor Restrepo, it's time to finish what we started." Marcus stepped back involuntarily, but the youngest man, barely 30 with dead eyes that belonged on someone twice his age, raised his hand in a gesture that was almost peaceful. "Please. We're not here to hurt you. Not yet." His English was flawless, touched with an accent that spoke of expensive schools and careful cultivation. "My name is Diego Mendoza. I believe you knew my father." The name hit Marcus like ice water. Carlos had a son. Of course he did. 38 years was long enough to build a family, to pass down hatreds like heirlooms. You were just a baby. 3 years old when you destroyed our lives. Diego's smile never wavered. "But children grow up, Señor Restrepo. They ask questions, they demand answers." The other 2 men flanked Diego silently, their suits expensive but their hands calloused in ways that suggested comfort with violence. Marcus calculated distances, angles, possibilities. All of them ended badly. Your father made his own choices. Did he? Diego stepped closer, and Marcus caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something else, gun oil. Because according to the story I've been told my entire life, you promised him protection. You promised all of them safe passage. Instead, you delivered them to Pablo like livestock to slaughter. Marcus's throat tightened. The truth was more complicated, more poisonous than anything Diego could imagine. But how could he explain that Carlos had volunteered for the mission? That Griselda's lieutenants had walked into that warehouse believing they were unstoppable, untouchable? The world was different then. Yes, it was. My father was different then too. Young, loyal, trusting. Diego's voice carried the weight of old grief transformed into surgical precision. He believed the DEA wanted justice. He believed you wanted to end the violence. So when you came to him with a plan to capture Pablo Escobar, I never promised him anything. Liar. The word cracked like a whip. For the first time, Diego's composure slipped, revealing something raw underneath. You recruited him personally, told him this was his chance to make things right, that capturing Pablo would mean amnesty, protection, a new life for his family. Marcus felt the walls closing in, not just physically but temporally, past and present colliding with devastating force. He remembered Carlos at 20, eager and desperate, trapped between Griselda's paranoia and Pablo's rising ambition. He'd been perfect for the role they needed him to play. Your father was already marked for death. Griselda suspected him of skimming. We offered him a way out by walking into an execution. Diego gestured to his companions. We've spent 2 years reconstructing that night, interviewing survivors, analyzing evidence, following money trails. Do you know what we discovered? Marcus said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. Pablo knew they were coming. Not just knew, he planned it. The whole capture scenario was theater, designed to gather Griselda's top people in one place where they could be eliminated cleanly. Diego's eyes glittered with something that might have been admiration. Brilliant, really, except for one detail. The apartment felt smaller with each passing second. Marcus could hear his heartbeat in his ears, could taste copper and regret. Someone else was supposed to die that night, weren't they? Someone whose death would have made the deception complete. Diego leaned forward. You were supposed to be Pablo's final victim, the heroic DEA agent who died trying to capture the king of cocaine. Except you didn't die, did you? You escaped, and Pablo let you. The accusation hung between them like a loaded gun. Marcus thought of his partner, Jimmy Rodriguez, 28 years old with a new wife and mortgage payments. Jimmy had volunteered to take point that night, had insisted on being the one to move in when the shooting started. He'd died believing Marcus was coming to back him up. You think I made a deal with Pablo? I know you did. Diego reached into his jacket and withdrew a manila envelope. Because we have proof. Photographs, financial records, testimony from people who were there. You didn't just escape that night. You were never in danger. Pablo's men had orders to let you live. Marcus's knees nearly buckled. For 38 years, he'd carried the guilt of surviving when better men died. He'd built his entire identity around being the one who got away, the lucky one, the man who'd seen too much and somehow lived to regret it. That's impossible. Is it? A DEA operation that goes wrong, leaving Pablo stronger than ever. An agent who retires early with a full pension and no questions asked. A man who disappears into civilian life and never speaks about what really happened. Diego's voice dropped to a whisper. How much did he pay you, Marcus? How much was my father's life worth? The world tilted sideways. Marcus gripped the doorframe, his wounded shoulder screaming in protest. Everything he'd believed about that night, about his own cowardice and survival, was crumbling. You're wrong. Then prove it. Diego smiled again, and this time Marcus saw Pablo in that expression. The same cold calculation, the same patient cruelty. Come with us, help us understand what really happened, and maybe, just maybe, we'll let your daughter live long enough to hear the truth. Marcus stared at Diego's face, seeing Carlos in the shape of his jaw, the way his eyes narrowed when he thought he held all the cards. But there was something else there, something that didn't fit the careful narrative Diego had constructed around his father's death. Your father never told you the whole truth, did he? Diego's smile faltered for a microsecond. He told me enough. He told you what he needed you to believe. Marcus straightened, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. Carlos wasn't some innocent caught between cartels. He wasn't skimming from Griselda. He was feeding information to Pablo for months before that night. Another lie. The warehouse meeting wasn't my idea, Diego. It was your father's. Marcus watched the young man's face, saw the first crack in his certainty. He came to me with intelligence about Griselda's operation. Locations, routes, personnel. Said he wanted out, wanted protection for his family. But there was a condition. Stop. He would only deal directly with Pablo. Said he had something too valuable to trust to intermediaries. Marcus took a step forward, and for the first time, Diego stepped back. Your father orchestrated his own betrayal, son. He just didn't realize Pablo was orchestrating him. The manila envelope trembled in Diego's hands. The photographs show exactly what your father wanted them to show. A corrupt DEA agent shaking hands with a cartel sicario. Perfect insurance if things went wrong. Marcus's voice hardened. But you never saw the other photos, did you? The ones from 30 minutes later. One of Diego's companions shifted uncomfortably. These were hired guns, Marcus realized, not true believers. They didn't know the story, didn't understand the history that had shaped their employer's obsession. What other photos? The ones that show your father executing 2 of his own men. Griselda's accountant and her chief of security shot them in the head while they trusted him enough to turn their backs. Marcus watched Diego's face crumble. Carlos wasn't a victim that night. He was Pablo's inside man, eliminating the competition. The only thing that went wrong was that Pablo eliminated him too. No. The word came out broken, desperate. He died trying to protect us. He died because Pablo never intended to honor their deal. Your father thought he was clever enough to play both sides, to secure a future for his family by betraying everyone who trusted him. Instead, he became just another corpse in Pablo's wake. Diego's hand moved toward his jacket but stopped halfway. His worldview was collapsing in real time, 30 years of carefully constructed hatred crumbling under the weight of truth. "The surveillance footage you sent me," Marcus pressed. "Did you actually watch all of it? Or did someone else tell you what it contained?" Diego's voice cracked. "We were told it showed your betrayal. It shows your father's betrayal. Of Griselda, of his own men, of the deal he'd made with me to provide intelligence in exchange for witness protection." Marcus felt no satisfaction in destroying the young man's illusions. Carlos played everyone, Diego, including his own son. The hallway seemed to contract around them. One of Diego's men whispered something urgent in Spanish, but Diego waved him off with a trembling hand. "Even if that's true, it doesn't explain how you survived. Everyone else in that warehouse died except you. Because I wasn't in the warehouse when the shooting started. Your father insisted on the meeting, insisted on the location, but he also insisted I wait outside until he gave the all-clear signal." Marcus's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. That signal never came. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late to save anyone. Diego's face had gone ashen. "You're lying. The man who sent you that surveillance footage, did he tell you his name?" Marcus studied the young man's expression, saw recognition flicker there. "Carlos Mendoza disappeared from federal custody 3 days ago. Your father's cousin. The one person alive who knows what really happened that night. Carlos is dead. He died in prison years ago." Another lie. "He's been watching, waiting, planning, using you to flush me out because he knows the truth about your father's betrayal. And he knows I'm the only witness left who can expose what really happened." Diego's hand fell away from his jacket completely. The manila envelope slipped from his fingers, photographs scattering across the hallway floor. Images of handshakes and meetings, carefully cropped to tell only part of the story. "My father." Diego's voice was that of a lost child. "My father was a hero. Your father was a man who made impossible choices in an impossible situation. But he wasn't a hero, son. Neither am I." Marcus looked down at the scattered photographs, pieces of a puzzle that had been deliberately incomplete. We're all just trying to survive the consequences of other people's wars. The truth hung between them like a death sentence, redefining everything Diego had believed about his purpose, his mission, his very identity. The scattered photographs lay between them like accusatory evidence of a trial that had already reached its verdict. Diego stared down at the images, his father's face caught in moments of apparent camaraderie with men who would be dead within hours. Marcus watched the young man's worldview disintegrate in real time, recognizing the particular agony of discovering that everything you'd built your life around was a lie. 30 years, Diego whispered, his voice hollow. 30 years I've been planning this moment." One of his companions cleared his throat nervously. "Diego, we should—" "Shut up." Diego's hand clenched into a fist. "Just shut up and let me think." Marcus understood the paralysis. He'd felt it himself that night in 1985, standing outside the warehouse as gunfire erupted inside, realizing that all his careful planning had been manipulated by forces beyond his comprehension. The knowledge that you'd been played, that your noble intentions had been weaponized against innocent people, was a poison that never fully left your system. "The cousin who contacted you," Marcus said quietly. "How did he find you?" Diego looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "Prison letters. Started 3 years ago. Said he'd been searching for family, that he had information about my father's death." He laughed bitterly. "I was so grateful. I'd spent my whole life with nothing but fragments, rumors, contradictions. Finally, someone who'd been there, and he fed you the story piece by piece." Photos first. Documents. Financial records showing payments to a DEA account. He said he'd been afraid to come forward before, that the corruption went too deep. Diego's voice gained strength as anger replaced devastation. He played me like a fucking piano. Marcus nodded. Carlos Mendoza, the cousin, not the father, had always been the patient one. Where his younger relative had been impulsive, driven by passion and desperation, Carlos the elder was methodical. He would have studied Diego for months before making contact, learning exactly which emotional buttons to push. He wants me alive, Marcus said. The question is why? Leverage. One of Diego's men spoke for the first time, his accent thick with Colombian mountains. Someone pays good money for the man who knows Pablo's secrets. Marcus looked at the speaker more carefully. Mid-40s, scarred hands, the kind of stillness that came from years of violence. A professional, but not one of Carlos's usual associates. You're not working for Carlos. We work for whoever pays. The man shrugged. Tonight that was supposed to be the boy. Tomorrow, he gestured meaningfully at Marcus. Could be you. Diego's head snapped up. What the fuck does that mean? Means your cousin's been shopping this job around Medellin for weeks. Different stories for different buyers. Some hear about DEA corruption, others hear about missing cartel gold. Everyone wants the man who survived Pablo's last game. The hallway suddenly felt like a trap within a trap. Marcus realized that Carlos had been playing an even deeper game than he'd imagined, using Diego's grief as bait, but preparing multiple exit strategies depending on how the confrontation played out. Classic misdirection: focus everyone's attention on the emotional reunion while the real prize slipped away unnoticed. Sophia. Marcus's blood went cold. He never wanted me. He wants my daughter. Your daughter? Diego looked confused. What does she have to do with any of this? She's a federal prosecutor, has access to sealed files, witness protection databases, financial records. Marcus was already moving toward his apartment, his mind racing through implications. Carlos isn't trying to expose the past. He's trying to erase it. Every witness, every document, every piece of evidence that could tie him to Pablo's operation. The Colombian mercenary smiled approvingly. Now you're thinking like a survivor. Marcus grabbed his go-bag from the bedroom, checking the clip on his revolver. How long has Sophia been under surveillance? 2 weeks, Diego answered automatically, then seemed to realize he was helping the man he'd come to kill. At least, that's what we were told. We. Marcus spun around. Who else is involved? Diego's face had gone pale again. There's a team in Miami, watching your daughter, mapping her routines. Carlos said it was just insurance to make sure you cooperated. He swallowed hard. But if what you're saying is true, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number, but the area code was local. Mr. Restrepo, your daughter is safe. For now. Warehouse District, Pier 47. Come alone, or she joins her grandfather's legacy. The reference to Sophia's grandfather, Marcus's father, who died fighting Pablo's organization in the mountains of Colombia 40 years ago, was deliberate provocation. Carlos knew exactly which scars to reopen. Change of plans, Marcus said, looking at Diego. You want the truth about your father? Come with me. But understand, after tonight, there's no going back to the story that's kept you warm for 30 years. Diego stood slowly, leaving the scattered photographs on the floor. I stopped believing in bedtime stories the moment you opened your door. The warehouse district at midnight was a graveyard of American industry. Rusted cranes reaching toward starless sky like skeletal fingers, shipping containers stacked in geometric monuments to commerce that had long since moved elsewhere. Marcus drove in silence, Diego beside him in the passenger seat, both men lost in their own reckonings with truth. The Colombian mercenaries followed in a second vehicle, their loyalty purchased but not guaranteed. In the rearview mirror, Marcus watched their headlights maintain a careful distance, professional paranoia outweighing whatever instructions they'd originally received. Pier 47, Marcus said, more to himself than to Diego. That's where it started. What started? My first meeting with your father. 1984. He was running numbers for Griselda's Miami operation, but already looking for angles. Marcus navigated around a cluster of abandoned shipping containers. Smart kid, reminded me of myself at that age, convinced I could outsmart the system instead of just surviving it. Diego's hands were steady on his weapon, but Marcus caught the slight tremor in his voice. What was he like then? Scared, ambitious, in love with your mother. Marcus pulled into the shadow of a loading crane, cutting the engine. He showed me her photograph that first night. Said he was going to marry her, buy a house in the suburbs, raise children who never heard gunfire in their sleep. The honesty felt like lancing a wound. For 38 years, Marcus had carried Carlos Mendoza's memory as an abstraction, a symbol of his own failures, a ghost to be exorcised. But sitting here with the dead man's son, he remembered the human being, 20 years old, desperate to escape a life that offered only violence or complicity. He never got the house, Diego said quietly. No, but he got you. The words hung between them as they approached Pier 47 on foot, leaving the mercenaries to secure the perimeter. The old pier jutted into Biscayne Bay like an accusation, its wooden planks weathered gray by decades of salt spray and neglect. At the far end, a single figure waited under a flickering streetlight. Carlos Mendoza, the cousin, the manipulator, the patient architect of this convergence, stood with his hands clasped behind his back, facing the dark water. Even at 62, he retained the compact build of a street fighter, though his hair had gone completely white and his face carried the deep lines of a man who had spent decades looking over his shoulder. Marcus. He turned as they approached, offering a smile that held no warmth. You look older. Prison suits you. Marcus stopped 20 feet away, keeping Diego slightly behind him. Though I hear you haven't been there recently. Carlos chuckled. Federal custody is surprisingly easy to escape when you have something the right people want. Information, for instance, about certain DEA operations that officially never happened. The implications crystallized with sickening clarity. Carlos hadn't just escaped, he'd been released. Someone in the federal system wanted Marcus Restrepo found, wanted the loose ends from 1985 finally tied off. The surveillance footage, Diego's recruitment, even this confrontation were all orchestrated by forces that made Pablo Escobar look like a street-level dealer. Where's my daughter? Safe, for the moment. Carlos gestured toward the water. Do you remember what your partner said that night? Jimmy Rodriguez, before he walked into the warehouse? Marcus's throat constricted. Jimmy's last words had haunted him for decades. Someone's got to pay the price for justice, Mark. Might as well be us. He died believing he was a hero, Carlos continued. Believing the operation would save lives, stop the violence, make a difference. Beautiful faith, don't you think? Get to the point. The point is that faith makes people predictable. Your partner's faith got him killed. My cousin's faith got him killed. And your daughter's faith in the justice system. Carlos shrugged eloquently. Well, that's about to be tested. Diego stepped forward, his weapon raised. Where is she? Ah, the sun speaks. Carlos studied Diego with predatory interest. You have your father's eyes, his certainty, that absolute conviction that the world should make sense, that actions should have consequences, that good men deserve good endings. He laughed softly. Your father believed all of that right up until Pablo put a bullet in his head. Enough. Marcus's voice cut through the night air like a blade. You want to settle accounts? Fine. But Sofia has nothing to do with what happened in 1985. Doesn't she? Carlos reached into his jacket and withdrew a thick manila folder. Sofia Restrepo, Assistant U.S. Attorney, Southern District of Florida. Currently investigating financial irregularities in the Witness Protection Program. Getting very close to discovering that certain high-value witnesses from the cocaine wars never actually died. They were simply relocated with new identities and federal pensions. The folder hit the pier with a wet slap. Photographs spilled out. Surveillance shots of Sofia entering the federal courthouse, meeting with investigators, reviewing case files. But it was the final image that stopped Marcus's heart. Sofia bound to a chair in what looked like another warehouse, very much alive but clearly terrified. Now, Carlos said, his smile finally reaching his eyes. Shall we discuss terms? The silence stretched between them like a held breath. Marcus stared at the photograph of Sophia, his daughter's face pale but defiant even in captivity, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. Not the familiar weight of guilt, but its absence. For 38 years he had carried the burden of that night in Medellin, the weight of choices made in impossible circumstances. Now, looking at Carlos's predatory smile, he understood that some debts could never be paid, some wounds would never heal, and some men would always choose destruction over peace. Your terms, Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying the finality of a closing door. Carlos opened his mouth to speak, but Diego moved first. The young man's weapon swung toward his father's cousin with practiced precision, 30 years of grief and rage distilled into a single moment of clarity. No more terms, Diego said. No more games, no more lies built on my father's grave. The shot echoed across the water like a judgment. Carlos Mendoza crumpled to the pier, his expression frozen in surprise that anyone had found the courage to end his long manipulation. The manila folder scattered in the wind, photographs of surveillance and blackmail drifting into the dark bay like confessions finally spoken aloud. Diego lowered his weapon, his hands shaking. The warehouse address is in his jacket pocket. GPS coordinates. Marcus found the slip of paper, coordinates written in Carlos's careful handwriting. As they ran back toward the car, he realized the Colombian mercenaries had vanished, professionals recognizing a contract that had just become void. In the distance, sirens wailed like mourners, but Marcus felt no urgency. The game was ending at last. They reached the warehouse as dawn touched the horizon, painting the sky the color of old blood. Sophia was exactly where the photograph had promised, bound but unguarded. Carlos had been too confident in his control of the situation to waste resources on security. She looked up as Marcus cut her restraints, her prosecutor's composure cracking just enough to reveal the frightened daughter beneath. "Dad," she whispered, and for a moment they were just a father and child embracing in an empty warehouse, the weight of history temporarily forgotten. Later, as the federal agents processed the scene and Diego gave his statement to detectives who would never fully understand the forces they were documenting, Marcus found himself standing alone on a different pier, watching the sun climb above Biscayne Bay. The water was the same blue-green it had been in 1985, unchanged by the violence that had played out on its shores. Sophia joined him, her FBI debrief completed, her questions about witness protection irregularities answered in ways that would reshape her understanding of justice. She stood beside him in comfortable silence, both of them learning how to exist in a world where the past had finally stopped demanding payment. "The prosecutor in me wants to ask if you're really innocent," she said eventually. "The prosecutor in you already knows the answer," Marcus replied. "Innocent isn't the right word for any of us. Then what is?" Marcus considered the question as a fishing boat traced a lazy path across the bay, its wake spreading in widening circles that eventually disappeared. "Finished," he said finally. "We're finished." Diego had declined witness protection, choosing instead to return to Colombia with his father's true story and the burden of deciding what to do with it. Some truths, Marcus had learned, were too large for one person to carry alone. The young man would find his own way to live with what he now knew, just as Marcus had found his. The small security firm would continue operating, though Marcus suspected his clients would never know how thoroughly their protector understood the value of vigilance. Sophia would return to her cases, her faith in justice tempered but not broken. The past would remain the past, its lessons learned but its debts finally forgiven. As they walked back toward the car, Marcus felt the absence of weight more than its presence, 38 years of guilt lifting like fog in morning sunlight. He had saved his daughter, protected what mattered most, and survived one final reckoning with choices made in a different lifetime. The story would stay with him, as all true stories do. But for the first time since that night in Medellin, Marcus Restrepo walked toward the future without constantly checking over his shoulder. Some prices, he had finally learned, were too high for anyone to pay, and some debts belonged to the dead, who had no use for payment. The bay sparkled in the morning light, indifferent to human consequence, eternal as forgiveness earned through survival rather than redemption. It was, Marcus thought, exactly as it should be.